heroes. Like, who are your heroes? Back in my day, I had a lot of heroes growing up, right? I loved, for me, like my athletes were my heroes. I kind of talked about this, right? Like my biggest hero growing up was this tennis player by the name of Rafael Nadal. Like, I loved him. I was him for Halloween. Like, I had my parents buy me his shirt from Nike. Like, I wore that thing around. Like, I wear the sweatbands. Like, I wanted to be Nadal so bad. I wanted to just, like, I played, like, when I used to play tennis, I used to hit the ball like him, even though his strokes are, like, completely, you know, canceled by tennis fundamentalists. And, like, you should not be doing that. Like, I love to emulate him on the court. Like, he, just running around, giving it max effort. Like, that was who I wanted to be. He was my hero. But history, at least as we know, has had a lot of heroes, at least according to the way that it's taught. But I don't think so. I'm here to tell you, to question that. Has there really been a single hero within history? Because let's break down like what exactly history is for a second, right? It's the past retellings. It's the retelling of the past and the retelling of past events to the current generation, so that we can look and identify the problems and the patterns that were seen in the past and prevent that from happening in the future. I think that's a pretty good working definition of history. But if you look at history and you look at human nature, I think in general, everyone's pretty flawed. Everyone's got problems, right? Uh, no one is perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. Your cousin down the street isn't perfect. Nobody is. And if you look at the way that history is written, history, at least the way it's taught and the way that historians and documentaries and all of these things that we're exposed to history by, are taught in a way that it's all a narrative. It's a story. It's a moving piece of a story. And that story and that narrative is told by the people who wrote it, right? History is all based on the people who wrote it and who delivered the information into your brain. So everybody's version of history is slightly different if you look at it in that sense. And really, I was thinking about this and I was like, the only true things that are the facts about history are battles, like when events took place, right? And maybe in war, whatever, conferences, like dates, specific dates, and then like battles, like death tolls, all of that, death dates, statistics, that type of thing. Those are besides concrete numbers, there's no fact in history. That is up to people's interpretation. I feel like that's what history is. It's a story. It's like English. You can interpret historical events and decisions that leaders made by looking at the various contexts, or by looking at what maybe leaders have wrote or leaders have said to the press, etc., etc. You can read into those things and then formulate a conclusion. But the reality is, the only person that knows history, no one knows the complete history of the world besides nobody. Nobody knows the history, unless you believe in God, which I don't. Nobody really knows the complete history of the world. I think there are semi-true things about history, right? Like you could say like Adolf Hitler was a bad guy. Fair. I think it's pretty much 99 up to about 99% of the world, Adolf Hitler is a bad guy, right? Like what's another one? Like what's another semi-true thing, right? Like who was a bad guy? Like there were some really bad guys in history, right? Cecil Rhodes was an asshole. He was a terrible man. Yes, we can fundamentally say that based on conclusions, based on things that people have said. Slavery was bad, right? Putting down a race is not good. We could see these are true things. These are true things, but they're also like derived by historical context. Okay. Sorry to get really deep here, by the way. But then there are like the interpretations. This is where like history just goes out the window. It just becomes all narrative, right? People call Neil Armstrong a hero. Was Neil Armstrong really a hero? Like, dude, it was cool, right? He went to the moon, like that's great. But his role in the history of the world is so overhyped. Okay, I don't think he's like a real hero. I think he was someone that like 9-year-olds probably looked at in 1961 and were like, "Damn, that's kind of cool." But like most people forgot about him. right? He wasn't a true hero. Like, he wasn't someone who fought an award, did any of that. But like, yeah, he accomplished an incredible thing, and that's awesome. But like, in terms of the whole history of the world, he was definitely like over, shot. He wasn't like there's different ways to interpret if Neil Armstrong was a real hero. There are a lot of historical questions. Why did Winston Churchill do what he did in Gallipoli? Right? Like that's a question that nobody fucking knows, but you as historians, like you have to figure it out. Right? Why did Hitler invade Poland first? Okay, historians can figure that out, but there are different interpretations, there are different sides, there are different perspectives. That's what I mean by that. And then there are like the criticisms of the actions. This is where like history becomes complete opinion, right? When you talk about like, oh, like I believe that General Lee's or fucking not General Lee, but like I believe that General Sherman's strategy of scorched earth in 1864 down Savannah, Georgia was completely unethical. Like, I mean, yeah, but like there's also another argument for it. Like, or like when history teachers are like, oh, dropping the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were terrible, right? Or like they were amazing, like it was great for America. It was like a great scientific achievement. That's when you go back and forth. There's so many different things within history that can be debated and looked at in a variety of different angles. But yeah, you could go on for days about the various historical events that can be debated and all of that. But here in America, and I can only speak from American history because I was taught America. I was taught in America. I grew up in America. I went to school in America. In America, we're taught history like it's a story. And I used to think this was a great thing. That's why I loved it. That's why I got A's in all my history classes. I just absorbed the information like it was a story. I'm an English-minded guy. I love narrative. I love the storytelling. I love the different events. I love how it was explained to me. I had great history teachers in high school who taught history like it was a story. And we're taught, but the thing is about a story is there's always a protagonist and there's always antagonists, right? And you're always taught to root for specific people, right? In American history, for example, you're all like from a young age, you're always taught to root for the Americans over the British for a variety of reasons, right? Good. Yeah, I think you should. Sure. Right? You're taught to root for George Washington. You're taught to root for Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. These are the heroes. Winston Churchill in world history. Who's another one? You're taught to like the antagonists of history. Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, obviously terrible guys. I'm not saying they should be protagonists, but maybe in their own weird, fucked up way, like in their head, they were the protagonist, which is, that's like the whole English and history thing combining itself. But here's some more complicated names, I think, throughout history of people who could have been good, but also could have been bad. George W. Bush. Was he a good president? Was he a bad president? Depending on who you are, you'll say different things, right? Gorbachev. Was he a good leader? Was he a bad leader? Depending on who you are, you say different things, right? Like Golda Meir. Was she good? Was she bad? Martin Luther King. Another person you're taught is a hero. Like, I'll give you the example of Martin Luther King. Why don't we go there? It was his day a couple days ago. Let's talk about Martin Luther King for a second. I don't think Martin Luther King is a hero. I'm sorry. I don't think he's a hero. And I'm not trying to sit here and cancel Martin Luther King at all. I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think what he did. Like, I think, like I said, human nature. We're naturally all flawed. But Martin Luther King isn't the hero that you think he is, in my opinion. He did a lot of great things, of course, right? Preaching nonviolence, like obviously getting America to the point where they signed the 1968 Civil Rights Act, and, gave African Americans a lot more privileges, and segregation became kind of a thing of the past to a certain extent. But he's not the saintly hero that American history portrays him to be. I think this is so interesting to me. Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King in American history is painted as like one of the Malcolm X is painted as this huge antagonist, and Martin Luther King is this hero who was like, we should never be violent and all of this stuff, right? But Martin Luther King was also not a great guy. In American history, he's portrayed like he's a god. He's not. I'm sorry. He's not a fucking god. Okay, Martin Luther King. Let's go through some of the things Martin Luther King did. Okay, I did a lot of research. Martin Luther King plagiarized parts of his doctoral passages. Okay, so he was a Dr. Martin Luther King, right? He got his doctorate, I believe, from some school in Boston. But a lot of his doctoral passages that he wrote in like his, doctorate paper were plagiarized. He plagiarized a lot of those. And he's known for being an educated guy. That's like his thing, right? Like he went to lots of years of school. He went to like theological school and like the theological seminary, and also went to like actual school and studied and like all this stuff. And like that's fine. Look, I know a lot of people who plagiarized in high school. Are they necessarily bad people? No, that's fine. Cool. But he also plagiarized quite a few of his speeches that were taken from different pastors in the South. Okay. And that's not great. That's not a great look, considering he's known as probably one of the best orators of our time. He did plagiarize a lot of his speeches. Just something to keep in mind. Again, this is not something I'm trying to cancel him with, but he did plagiarize his speeches. I think that's something you should know. Here's an interesting one. MLK was not, I know like MLK and like particularly in pop culture, and MLK and Coretta are seen as this like huge power couple in society. They weren't. Okay. Like Martin Luther King like funded sex parties and stuff. Like this is known fact. He funded sex parties through like the SLCC's money, which he was the head of. And which was like also like the SLCC was like being used as like a racial nonprofit to like fight against civil rights or fight for civil rights and all this stuff. And Ralph Abernathy, like his was his best friend at the time and like one of his closest friends and confidants. And like he like basically like talks about all of this in his memoir. His friend reveals everything. Like he just like goes into way graphic detail. I'm not gonna go into the graphic detail, but he did. Martin Luther King did fund sex parties. This is a fact. This is a fact. You can look on this. He cheated on Coretta, obviously. He was actually like with a woman the day he got assassinated, which is a fun fact. He wasn't in Memphis to see that woman. He was in Memphis to give a speech at a garbage strike, a sanitation workers strike, which is interesting. But he was with a woman the day before he got assassinated. He was like in some weird thing with some women. But here's the thing. A lot of this information, why it hasn't been released necessarily, and I think it will be released in the next upcoming years, is because the FBI files at Martin Luther King are not out. For those of you that don't know, Martin Luther King was like basically wiretapped by the FBI, and they were trying to figure out like if he was involved with the communists. That's why they were wiretapping him, because this was peak Cold War and all this stuff. And the FBI files are actually coming out in 2027. So when those files come out, I bet you a lot of this stuff is going to become public information. A lot more people are going to be questioning why we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, and all that. How do I know this information? You probably are wondering that. Like I said earlier, I think it comes from a lot of people who wrote books, like Ralph Abernathy, who was like one of MLK's best friends, and firsthand accounts also from the people who were close to him in his life, because that's the best I can do. I cannot go to the fucking DC and request those files. They're going to be available in 5 years, and we'll see what happens then. I say all of this to like not disgrace him. I don't think Martin Luther King is a bad guy. Like I said, like I think he did a lot of amazing things. He's a huge part of American history. I'm not trying to take down the Black community. There are a lot of nuances to the civil rights movement, and I think MLK is not this saintly figure like he's portrayed. He is a very nuanced man, like everybody is. And Malcolm X is the same way. Malcolm X is a fucking misunderstood dude. Okay? Malcolm X is not like in class. We were always taught that Malcolm X was the guy who believed in any means necessary to gain independence for African Americans, whether that meant just killing white people and all of this stuff. And they portrayed him as this super violent man. I remember this specifically, 7th grade, Miss Duran. Shout out Miss Duran. Okay. Shout out Miss Duran. If you're listening to this, Miss Duran, hi. I hope you're doing well. Miss Duran was the first person who told me that there was more to Malcolm X than him just being violent. And I remember like asking her a bunch of questions. She handed me the autobiography. She said, read it. I never finished it. I read like parts of it. I read like 100 pages, and it's great. It's one of the best books, apparently, according to people. There's also a movie. Denzel Washington plays Malcolm X. It's supposed to be really, really good. I did a lot of research into Malcolm X when I was in middle school and high school, and really looked into who he was. He's a super complicated dude. And I think like the way that he does talk about violence and like using violence, but he doesn't talk about it in like we have to eliminate all white people, like the way that history books talk about Malcolm X. It's a very nuanced argument that he makes, and I think it's actually a very fair argument. I think it's a realistic argument for the time. And the way that people portray this Malcolm versus Martin debate was just trying to pit the African American community together, pit the African American community against each other, in my opinion. And it was sort of a tactic to almost pit them apart, which is kind of crazy. Um, Malcolm X just had a different approach to independence, but him and MLK were trying to reach the same goal. And actually, like if you look at reports, they were not like anti each other at all. They never really like talked in public and stuff, but like they were never against each other. Yeah, they believed in two separate religions. Like Malcolm X was a devout Muslim, and MLK is a devout Christian. Their whole like relationship, like Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, is something that does not get talked about in American history, but it's a super interesting, very fascinating relationship that they barely knew each other, but like they were also like rivals because America, the newspapers painted them like that, and it's pretty complicated and interesting. I highly recommend you guys go watch that. The point being, a lot of history that we're taught is very narrative based, but it's fun to go back and unlearn all the shit that we were taught because there was a lot of weird shit in there. And I find it interesting because I have these conversations with my mom, and she comes at it from an Indian perspective because in India they were taught different narratives about Indian history and all the various things that the Indian government went through with independence and all this stuff, and they were taught history in a certain way to believe that certain people were the heroes when in reality like those people didn't do those things, right? Like Mahatma Gandhi, for example, is looked at as a saint-like figure in India when in reality like the man was a little flawed. He was known for sleeping next to little girls and a lot of very messed up things, like he was in child marriage and all this stuff. Like I don't know too much about it, so I don't feel the liberty to talk about it here, but definitely go do your research on Gandhi. He's a very interesting dude, and did a lot of weird stuff for sure. Martin Luther King's idol, by the way. So it's kind of cool to see that kind of cultural mix because my mom's going through it with Indian history, and I'm kind of seeing it with American history, and it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to see.